Welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm Lee Rennick, Executive Director of CIO Communities for CIO.com, and I'm very excited and honored to introduce Sarah Bitadem, CIO and CISO of Novanta. Sarah, could you please introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little about your current role?
Thank you so much, Lee. Really appreciate having me on. My name is Sarah Bitadem. I am a CIO CISO for Novanta. I started in Novanta about 5 years ago, and my first mission was to bring scalability for our back office solutions, as well as really bringing the technology to it, having a digital roadmap to bring the technology up to date and reduce the tech debt, and looking at the ways to making sure that we're growing at scale and really coming together. So Novanta is a medical device company, and it consists of business units. And the way that we are scaling is through organic growth as well as the acquisition. So one of the many mission is, how do you make sure that the when you're acquiring company, you bring them along and you're integrating them to the hopefully a good foundational systems. So that kind of started this whole journey coming together. I was in the middle. I started as a CIO, but then and then with the cybers, keep on happening all the time, cyber events. Then I set up the first group of cyber program, and we are definitely a long way from that as well. And in fact, we're going to be getting our ISO certification, for 27001, hopefully soon this
Fantastic.
year. And that has been instrumental. So we started, with the crawl, walk, run. So, hopefully we are definitely walking fast. There's always room to run, but we certainly are not, maybe sprinting, but not running a marathon yet. But it's, I have to say that I give the credit to all the team members. And these are the team members within my group, from help desk to infrastructure to application and the software engineers to the entire Novanta, because without them, the cyber security will be, essentially, you can't do it alone. It's a team event.
Yeah.
A lot of these transformational programs, from reporting and a BI to you really having a cohesive sales and marketing to ERP, it is everyone. This is not an IT, only project. So I have to say that it's been a long journey, but it's been a successful journey with a lot of people. So really happy to be here and sharing my message with you.
Wow, a huge remit with a company that has a lot of history, right? So you probably had to juggle a lot of different things. All right. Well, I really appreciate you joining us here today, Sarah. Thank you so much. We've developed the series to support the technology leader in their tech and leadership journey. So the first question I ask, and I ask everyone this question, could you please tell me a little bit about your own career path, any lessons learned along the way, and any thoughts maybe you want to share about, women listening in who are building their career in technology?
So my career started as so from my studies, I started as a computer science as a bachelor, and then I continued that as a computer science for my master's. Something happened between my master's studies that I was introduced to an FBI agent who was being a guest speaker at my school. And he introduced forensic analysis, and so I audited that class that he had, and ended up teaching it. At the beginning, it wasn't a credited class, and then he ended up teaching it. And what I learned about how the science and engineering can come together to be more applicable than being less theoretical and seeing the application of it. So that's where I actually switched to computer engineering middle of my my master's. I ended up getting it in computer engineering and specializing in data assurance and forensics. And I think that's where my love to security also began, of how data is important and data belongs to the owner, and how do we protect it, especially with the having the other mission of digitalization. So it's a little bit of a yin and yang in my life, but I do believe in data assurance. And then I started working, and I had many great positions throughout. I worked in many different industries, from biotech to pharma to tech software companies, and currently in medical device company. But one thing I have learned that it's never too late to continue learning. So then I end up getting my doctorate in computer and system engineering, and I think that was another pivotal moment for me in making sure that I voice that to all the women who are listening and who don't like going to the computer engineering. It's, first of all, it's never too late to learn and pivot. And it's not that difficult that everybody is trying to make it. I think everyone is smart enough, and if you study hard, I think you could definitely achieve it. We need more women in technology. My mission is to make sure that I get out there and really encourage and tell all the women who are working in a different positions, or have daughters or cousins or nieces who are growing up, that having the exposure to STEM is important. Now, if the people choose not to go that's not an issue. It just, the possibility is there for people to be eager to learn and be successful in their own merits. So I think that one of the as I grew through technology, and I had many different positions, so never be afraid to change. It's scary. I will give you that. It's never an easy thing to completely shift, but I've done many different jobs. I've been inside of IT, I've been outside of IT, I've been in engineering, I've been in sales organization. So it gives you the outlook of how others perceive technology, or how do you make sure that you're influential, and how do you bring other people along? Because in this position as a CIO or CISO, you don't manage people directly. It's a matrix situation. So you need to be able to bring people along, show them, tell them why and why and what you're doing, and then make sure that you're able to have those influences to bring them along. Now, being in a different position definitely helped me to speak their language. So R&D speaking their language. They like someone who could think about engineers, sales, same way. So I think that don't be afraid to change and move around in an organization to learn new things.
I think that's fantastic. And what a journey you've had. And, you're continuing on that in your dual role in your organization. I mean, hugely inspiring, because often you see those two roles very separate. So I love this approach. And, it very much aligns with a lot of the research I look at, which is around women in tech, that they take a journey that's different sometimes than men, and they usually touch all parts of the business. But then the research shows that having women in these leadership positions actually creates more shareholder and stakeholder value. And maybe to your point, which is really great, is that you're touching on different parts of the business so you understand it, and you can kind of come into those meetings and speak the language, which is, I'm getting the goosebumps right now, which is truly inspiring. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks,
I really appreciate it. Okay, so when we last chatted, you talked about developing, implementing, and managing the ERP process across the business, which is huge. So as a tech leader, that's a very large remit. You mentioned that it involved everyone from infrastructure teams to leadership. So maybe could you share some of the best practices and frameworks, maybe and strategies you use to navigate that process?
Thank you, Lee. I just came back from a leadership conference that we had as well, and I shared the I given an update to the team members there. I think that ERP touches everyone in the organization, from a manufacturing floor to middle management to upper management to executives, and I'm really, I have to say, it's always great to have the sponsorship of your manager and the CEO. So in this particular journey that I am going through, I have the CEO and CFO who are right along with me, shouldering this responsibility and really empowering me to make sure that we're doing the right things and they're there to advise and help. That's huge. Now, how do you get there? Sometimes, in this particular case, I'm lucky because at the time when I was being hired, there was a desire to make sure that we are advancing and coming as one company to scale in a larger revenue, larger business, different business models. So definitely the appetite has been there now. But so then if you have the executive leadership, how do you make sure that when you're going down, that you bring them along? So our setup is based on business units. So we have general manager for each business unit, and they're the next level to convince that this is the right thing. And there is definitely always, as the stats will show, there's 75% of ERP program fail. Mm-hmm. And only 25% are successful.
Wow.
So what are the ingredients of the 25% that you could set up the, building blocks for and share it and bring everyone along? So making sure that we're part of that stats, not the 75%.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a betting person, this is pretty low stat to win.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I learned about, Novanta leadership and even, the going down, we have a sense of belonging and courage. So I think every leader needs to have a courage and to take some risk, but calculated risk and always mitigate. So there is certainly that appetite. Was that appetite always there? No. So when I started this journey in 2020, other than upper management that I mentioned, the appetite wasn't really everywhere else. So what I did was we had workshop right at the time of the COVID, and then everybody shut down around March 15th of 2020. Mm-hmm. So our workshop was April 1st of 2020. So then we had to cancel. Everybody is remote, but we didn't stop. And that's where we had the workshop. We had to shorten them. We had 42 people across the globe from different positions to come together. What are the business capabilities? What are our pain points? What does ERP means to Novanta?
Yeah.
So we highlighted all of those, many sessions, at least a quarter. And then we started bringing different vendors in to see which software will work for us.
Yeah.
Moving forward to the integrators and so on. And as life happened in between 2020 and we are now 2024 and we're kicking it off now. So it's a long journey. But what that tells the others is don't ever give up, because business moves based on economy and based on the business decision. That doesn't mean that ERP or your whatever other initiative that you're doing is not important. Yeah. It's just business. You have to be able to be flexible to move with business at a different point of business. So it wasn't time in 2020. Now it's time in 2024. But don't ever give up. So I would definitely emphasize on that.
I think that's great advice. I mean, that's great advice. I mean, it's inspiring me right now, but also I think just the approach that you took, it was like, you brought in various parts of the business. You had something that came up, which was COVID, that none of us really expected, right? So you had to shift and move, but sounds like you kept to your principles of what you were doing to enhance the business. And like you said, you were flexible in that approach. But this ties in really well to the next question. So every year we release the State of the CIO report, and I usually ask most leaders this question. And it concluded that of the 1,100 that were research tech leaders, 79% said the CIO has an educational partnership with the CEO and the board of directors. So you just came back from an educational event, but maybe you could talk a little bit about this. Any advice for that leader out there around, you know, your approach with the CEO and the board and the C-suite?
Yes, and I think this might come as a surprise for some of the viewers here, but I would say be honest, and tell the whole story. Because you know, if you are trying to, you know, change the story line, then you forget, and the next time you meet, you know, so then you're like, all right, but that's not what you told us. So I would say always be honest in terms of so I report to board for cybersecurity. They're the oversight of the cybersecurity roadmap. And then we have also, you know, audit committee and ESG committee. I think that you have to build the trust just like you build a trust with your teams. And how do you build a trust is to have an open, honest relationship. So that's how you start, because if, you know, so then when things are tough and you're going back to the board or the CEO, then they know that, you know, you're trying to do something about it, and they have your back, because then they know that you will tell them the whole picture, not half a picture or one quarter of a picture.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, treat them just like anyone else that you're building a relationship throughout the company or throughout your personal life. You start from the foundation as building the trust and relationship with them. And by that, being transparent and honest.
And we didn't have this one planned, but I just thought I'd ask you this question because I spoke to somebody, a CIO from a major insurance company in the US when we were at one of our events. And she was saying, like, also there's a kind of responsibility now at the board level around having maybe someone on the board that understands technology a little bit better, that you can really hunker down with, to have those conversations, that maybe you bring that honesty to the table as a leader and you're telling them about it, but you've got somebody on that, in that space, that kind of understands what you're working with. Is that something that you've experienced or you would recommend?
Absolutely. And I'm lucky to have two in this current board. That, you know, and others are trying as well. So they are trying to really be that advisor. I definitely recommend someone with, you know, either technology background or interested in technology to learn to have that background. And I've seen now, in particular when it comes to the cyber, there's a lot of you know, recommendation for people who have cyber background to get on the board, you know, to advise, be the advisory for the board and for the company.
I appreciate that. Thanks for letting me ask that extra question. All right. So we're, you know, obviously in this phase this year of learning how all sorts of leaders are using Gen AI to build productivity and value at their businesses. And that's what I'm hearing mainly, that this year has been about internal productivity, you know, with Gen AI. As mentioned earlier, you hold a dual remit as both the CIO and the CISO at Novanta. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, because we don't talk a lot about this in a lot of my conversations, but could you talk about security and AI and perhaps your approach to that? Are there any tips on strategies for those listening in?
First of all, CEO is sponsoring AI for me, so it's helpful as well. So we are focusing on productivity, and I think that the innovation setup is just, you need to balance it with also the risk that comes along with it, because I think, for example, you've seen that how AI can emulate. Is it really Sarah sitting here, or is it image of Sarah speaking here? I could assure your audience this is actually me. But with the risk and how do you mitigate against that? It's moving very rapidly, and I have to tell you that from the innovation perspective, I'm excited. From the security, I'm less excited about it, because how do you now come up with a way of defending against the different vectors that are coming through AI? This is new. A lot of cyber professionals. I went to a conference this summer, and we were all trying to come up with ways to how do we mitigate. There is a red team AI concept that is going like to see how the companies are able to defend themselves. There's different approaches of authenticity and where the data are going and where they're coming, are they being used for outsiders? So there's a lot of risk from the data, from the copyrighted information, from the perspective of emulating our CEO to have a different point of view, which is really not our CEO. This is becoming it's definitely top of mind. Do I have a fabulous solution for it? No. No one else does, but this is there are ways to kind of minimize it. But I would say, just like if you ask any CISO, are you ever going to be hacked? And if they say no, that's to me is not reasonable. It's just when it's going to happen and how you're going to deal with it. And I think that we're all working on how we're going to deal with it. Yeah,
no, I think that's great advice. I remember a year or so ago, I interviewed a CIO. They were hacked, and she said the biggest turning point when we talk about that board leadership question, she said, the biggest turning point was, it was a Sunday. She was having her coffee. She found out the board was saying, well, just get us back online. And she said, I can't. Like, it's not going to happen. She talks very openly about it because she said, I want to educate others. Like, as you said, it's the planning, it's the building those building blocks that you need, for your defense around it. And, then continuing to learn and making sure that your board and others are educated on what could happen, right?
Yes, absolutely. And these are the topics that if they're not public, you can't really speak about. But I would doubt that no one has been hacked.
Yeah.
So it's just to what degree. And I think that how you are measured is based on how fast you can recover from it.
Yeah, exactly. Great advice. And thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. And thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me here today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Lise, very, very much. And it's been a pleasure. Hopefully, I was able to definitely emphasize on women in tech. And I would love to have conversation with whoever hears this message. Is that yes, it is hard. We all had our difficulties, but one way to deal with it is to try harder, but different ways of going and pivoting from it. Try not to give up. It are times that are hard, but just know that you're not alone. There's a lot of women leaders across the nation and internationally as well that deal with the similar situations. And I think with a lot of situations, there's a lot of training that others are going through that it's helping educating others for the value that we bring as women in tech. So I would say it's only going to get better, and please don't be discouraged and just keep on going, because the world is ours, so we could conquer whatever we want to.
Fantastic, inspiring advice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you
so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And for anyone that listening to this episode, we'll have it posted at CIO.com as well as through our social media channels. Thanks again.